Rail travel aficionados are fuming at CEO Richard Anderson's decision to ditch the iconic Amtrak dining car on some of its long-distance routes, calling the new contemporary food options nothing more than a downgrade dressed up in corporate euphemisms. They viewed this decision as a particularly misguided one in a long series of arbitrary cuts made in the short-sighted pursuit of corporate profits. Moreover, people didn't like how Amtrak seemed to be scapegoating millennials, whom the company claims aren't so fond of the traditional dining car concept and would rather have their meals in the comfort and privacy of their own seats or roomettes. Are the rail fans correct? Or is a really bad case of nostalgia preventing them from seeing the merit in a shrewd business decision by a veteran CEO? Or perhaps other factors are at play here. First things first, when it comes to the new, contemporary, more flexible dining options on Amtrak's long-distance routes, I feel their assessment is spot on. There is nothing contemporary about replacing freshly prepared meals, cooked in an actual kitchen, with what is essentially microwavable airplane food. After all, CEO Richard Anderson is the turnaround artist responsible for bringing Delta Airlines back from bankruptcy. Spoilers. He did not do this by going the extra mile and offering superb service to passengers, but rather by ruthlessly cutting costs. So yeah, microwave ovens have been around since the 1940s. Not exactly my definition of contemporary. There might be some tangential merit to the argument that millennials aren't so keen on the idea of, quote-unquote, breaking bread with strangers at the quote-unquote communal tables aboard Amtrak, but even that is a sweeping generalization. At most, you could say this demographic probably doesn't feel as strongly about the white linen cloth dining experience as the older generations. To wit, and according to an article in the Washington Post, Amtrak began testing boxed meals on its Crescent trains. Since then, it has tweaked the menu based on customer feedback. Officials learned, for example, that the public's perception of food boxes wasn't as favorable as it hoped, and that passengers wanted more hot food options. So, while according to CEO Richard Anderson, the changes haven't hurt ticket sales, the new menu hasn't exactly been met with roaring applause either. This isn't so much a case of people actually liking the food, but rather of people adjusting to lower quality options. So that's that. But today, we will be digging deeper, past the headlines and commentary, in an attempt to get a better understanding of Amtrak's operational structure and the struggles it faces. The history of the dining car dates back to the 1860s, long before President Nixon signed Amtrak into existence in 1971. The dining car has always been a loss leader for railway operators, offering food and service often rivaling traditional fine dining restaurants. This was particularly true in the heyday of rail travel, as passengers were offered lavish dining options, including multiple course meals featuring delicacies like English loin chop with kidney and fresh mushrooms, and a salmi of quail with truffles, an exotic dish that takes several hours to prepare. Even children's menus offered a far more sophisticated dining experience back in the day, says Rachel Cole from the Northwestern University Transportation Library, which has recently digitized and made available to the public an impeccably maintained collection of old railroad dining menus. Kids had access to a wider array of options, such as grilled lamb chops, roast beef, and seasonal fish. Things got a bit out of hand though, and by the 1950s, railways were operating their fancy dining cars at a loss of 40 cents on the dollar. Not that rail travel in general is a particularly lucrative business. Just ask Amtrak, who have never turned a profit in their almost 50-year history. CEO Richard Anderson would be quick to point out Amtrak posted a staggering operating income improvement of 82.6% for the fiscal year ending in September 2019, and that the company expects to break even next fiscal year. Ditching the dining car alone will save the company $2 million every year. Unfortunately, if you dig into their financial reports, you'll see that Amtrak categorizes state subsidies as quote-unquote passenger-related revenues. With this particular category of passenger-related revenues, totaling $233.8 million for fiscal year 2018, Amtrak has never even come close to being profitable. Beyond this accounting sleight of hand, the truth is that Amtrak really is made up of two completely different businesses. The Northeast Corridor, from Boston to Washington, D.C., and all the other lines west of the Mississippi River. Owning the majority of the rail track that comprises the Northeast Corridor allows Amtrak to run an efficient and profitable operation. The trains run on time, generating the company $524 million in profit during fiscal year 2018. West of the Mississippi River, however, they own only a tiny fraction of the rail tracks, meaning they're at the mercy of freight operators. Trains are often late by several hours, costing Amtrak $42 million every year in delays, and leading to declining ridership for its long-distance trains. Needless to say, these routes lose money and are subsidized by Amtrak's profits in the Northeast Corridor. If CEO Richard Anderson had his way, he would probably ditch, or at least segment into shorter routes, everything else to focus on the Northeast Corridor and on intercity routes, which are a big part of the plan to turn things around at Amtrak. I mean, he has even floated the idea of completely replacing rail service to parts of rural America with driverless vans. Additionally, the Empire Builder and California Zephyr, Anderson explains, could be converted into luxury excursion routes for rail aficionados. They could then focus on the $41 billion in depreciation associated with tunnels and bridges and other infrastructure the company was, and is, too broke to take care of. You might then be wondering, $2 million in cost cuts will hardly solve Amtrak's structural profitability issues, especially since these changes were enacted on the Northeast Corridor, which actually makes the company money. So what gives? It does appear to be a gratuitous decision, and definitely not worth annoying the over 150,000 people that have signed a petition to bring back service on all long-distance trains. Indeed, but one key piece of legislation, Federal Code 49 U.S.C. Chapter 24321, Amtrak Food and Beverage Reform, stipulates that Amtrak must at least break even on food and beverage service during fiscal year 2020. So I did feel a little sorry for Richard Anderson when he testified before the House of Representatives last November, during which testimony he received some flack for his decision to fast-foodify the dining car. I'd feel pretty confused and mildly irritated myself if it were me sitting there being grilled by the same people who imposed those profitability targets in the first place. I feel I would be sitting there channeling my inner Martin Shkreli, not by pleading the Fifth Amendment for 2 hours straight, but rather by going on and on about my fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder profits, or rather minimize taxpayer losses, since Amtrak is not a publicly listed company. Come to think of it, now might be a good time to IPO. They can call themselves a technology company, and who knows, maybe SoftBank will decide they want a piece of the action. But in all seriousness, Mr. Anderson clearly handles scrutiny much better than I would, because when questioned about his decision to ditch the dining car, the Amtrak CEO kept his composure and merely stated that such decisions are made based on data and not anecdote, and that the data reflects passengers' preferences. Or said more plainly, we thought we could get away with it without hurting ticket sales, and it turns out we were right.